I want us to dive in a little bit tonight into the tenacity of a leader. And when you think of tenacity, there are 10,000 examples, and also there are 10,000 examples of people that didn't have tenacity, that quit, that took the easy road. And so I want us to talk about it because we live in a culture of quitters, of people at the first sign of trouble, the first sign of problems, they quit. I was watching the Book of Manning a few nights ago, and Peyton Manning was talking about he had to be in a school play and he had to dance the tango. And he said, I went into the drama class to get out of taking another class that I didn't want to take. He said, but my dad had a rule. You sign up for a class, you take it, and you finish it. And, seeing Peyton do a tango is a little interesting in light of everything else he does. But, I remember my dad let me quit some things. And so it built in me a first response of, well, I'll just quit. And that doesn't need to be what we teach people. We need to teach tenacity. An old football adage says the first rule of winning is don't beat yourself. And part of tenacity is not beating yourself. John Maxwell said this: in every age, there comes a time when a leader must come forward to meet the needs of the hour. Therefore, there is no potential leader who does not have an opportunity to make a positive difference in society. I've got a bunch of little quote books in my office, and dozens of them, little small quote books that they used to print a lot more of. And I've got one called Life's Little Instruction Book, and in that book it says there are 2 rules to perseverance. Rule number 1, take one more step. Rule number 2, when you can't take one more step, refer to rule number 1. Take one more step. Let's look at the certainty of Nehemiah and his tenacity, which means just to hold firm and to persist in a course of action. Here's a man who was willing to hold firm and persist in a course of action, and that was to rebuild the wall. He had come back for a specific purpose, and he wasn't going to let anything or anyone deter him from doing that. So number 1, he knew God had called him. He knew God had called him. Now, as believers, we need to understand the call of God on our lives. We've talked about that a lot. Jeremiah chapter 1, before you were ever born, in your womb, I knew you. God called. God's call is a clarion call. God does not mutter when he calls. He does not waffle when he calls. He knew that God had called him. Secondly, he knew God was directing his path. This was not Nehemiah's plan. It was first and foremost God's plan for Nehemiah. He believed that God had led him to this opportunity, that God had led him through this open door. My friend Derek Johnson, who's one of the most creative people on the planet, one of the great leaders that I've ever met, says, too many people bounce frantically from place to place, opportunity to opportunity, dream to dream, and consequently never develop the depth of character or height of achievement that is personally possible or divinely intended. A person may be so much of everything that he is nothing of anything. There has to be a sense that God is directing our paths. Paul said, this one thing I do. He didn't say these 40 things I'm considering doing. Paul was on a mission to accomplish what God had put him on the earth for. And all of us, whether we are called vocationally, whether we are called in an outward leadership position or as a mom or a dad or a teenager on a campus, all of us need to know that we are called and that God will direct our paths. Thirdly, he knew that life will throw you a curve. My friend Tim Burke, who pitched for about 10 years in the pros, he and I talked about how you set up somebody as a pitcher and how you set them up and then throw them the pitch that they're not anticipating. And sometimes when somebody is anticipating a fastball, they get a curveball, and it throws them off balance. Life throws us curves. Everybody here had a curve thrown at you? Some of you have been hit by them. I've been hit by them. Life is going to throw you a curve. We shouldn't be shocked when it happens. And some people just want to pull the covers over their head and just say, oh, I can't take life. And they just quit and they resign and they pull back rather than going forward. Sometimes it is in the throwing of the curve that you see the opportunity to take the next step. So life throws us a curve. He knew the necessity of prayer. He knew the necessity of prayer. And we've talked about prayer a lot already, but prayer is the knowledge that it's not my ministry, it's not my calling, it's not my gift, it's not my talent, it's God's, and I need to depend on Him. Listen, God doesn't want to be a silent partner in our lives. When Daniel prayed, he threw open the doors. Hey, see what I'm doing? This is what I'm about. God doesn't want to be a silent partner. He wants to be a part of the DNA of our lives, the conduit through which He flows with us and gives us the tenacity to stand. There are so many examples in the Bible that come to mind right now, but Elijah, right after he stood and faced all those false prophets, and he had held off the rain, his prayer had held off the rain, and then his prayer brought back a cloud the size of a man's hand, and then he outruns a chariot, outruns Ahab's chariot, and then finds himself sitting under a tree having a pity party. And God let him have it for about that long. And then God said, get up. You got stuff to do. He did the same thing to Joshua, by the way. After the Battle of Ai, when the Israelis were defeated and they had been wiped out by this little 2-bit town, he goes and cries out to God and starts praying. And then he goes and prays again when they make a covenant with a nation they should have never made a covenant with. And God basically says to Joshua, quit praying and get up and do what I told you to do. There's a prayer environment that forces us, causes us, gives us catalyst to move forward. We just can't sit there and pray and pray and pray. We got to get up and do something about what we've been praying about. And God empowers that. In a prayer environment, we adjust to God's timing. We place our agenda on the altar and get His agenda in our head and in our heart. Number 5, He established priorities. He established priorities. Les Brown said, find out what you want and go after it as if your life depended on it, because it does. He established priorities. Now, I found this illustration this week. Thomas Edison had a goal for one major invention every 6 months. That was his goal. And a minor one every 10 days. Thomas Edison he got up every day thinking, I've got 10 days to make a minor invention, and I've got 6 months for a major one. When Thomas Edison died, he held 1,093 U.S. patents and 2,000 foreign patents. He didn't get that by waiting on it to come to him. He got after it. He had priorities. Now here's Nehemiah. It's a grim setting. The walls are down. The people are discouraged. The gates are burned. There's no sense of security. And what they needed was a never-say-die leader. They needed somebody that wouldn't blink. They needed someone who had set priorities, who knew what he wanted to do, where he was going, and had it figured out about how he was going to get there. So, you see in your notes, the Bible's full of stories of tenacity. Tenacity doesn't happen on easy street. And by the way, tenacity doesn't translate into being a jerk. You can be a jerk and not have tenacity. But tenacity is a bulldogged approach to life. I mean, you ever wondered why a bulldog's nose is turned backwards and up and away so it can get a hold of you? and hold on. Tenacity is holding on. I love the way Vance Havner described it. Vance Havner said, we need to have a hide of a rhinoceros and the heart of a lamb and not get the two confused. What we do sometimes is we think tenacity makes us cold and hard and indifferent. Tenacity does not make us cold and hard and indifferent. It just makes us know that there are things we have to do to see what God wants to do in us and through us. I want you to look in your notes. I love this. It's in, and I wanted to put it in your notes because I knew if I read it, somebody would come say, can you put that somewhere so we can get it? Lock him in a prison cell, and you have John Bunyan. Bury him in the snows of Valley Forge, and you have George Washington. Raise him in abject poverty, and you have Abraham Lincoln. Strike him down with infantile paralysis, and you have Franklin Roosevelt. Rate him as mediocre in chemistry, and you have Louis Pasteur. Label him as too stupid to learn, and you have Thomas Edison. Deafen a genius composer, and you have Beethoven. Call him a slow learner, retarded, and ineducatable, and you have Albert Einstein. Blind him, and you have Ray Charles. Tell her she's too old to start painting at 80, and you have Grandma Moses. Call him dull and flunk him in the 6th grade, and you have Winston Churchill. Tell a young boy who loves to sketch he has no talent, and you have Walt Disney. Priorities. Aren't you glad that those people didn't let what people thought about them or said about them affect what they wanted to do with their lives? Number 6, he lived in light of the long view. He lived with a long view. He didn't just look at the step in front of him. He lived with a long view. He saw a bigger picture than the average person sees. During the days of the Korean conflict, Scott Peterson was wounded, mortally wounded. A friend came to his side while he was dying, and Peterson asked that his friend write 2 letters, one to his mother, to tell his mother that he was a believer and that he knew as he died he was going to spend eternity in heaven and that he would meet her there. The second letter that Peterson asked to be written was to Mrs. Gunderson. Mrs. Gunderson was his Sunday school teacher. And he said, please tell her I never forgot a thing she taught me. When Mrs. Gunderson got that letter, she said, oh my, I quit teaching 11 years ago because I thought I wasn't making a difference. Be careful how soon you quit, because there may be somebody out there that comes back one day and says, because you stayed at it, I learned lessons that I needed to learn. Now, there's a picture here of the wall. This is actually a portion of the wall that still remains that Nehemiah built century after century later. Now, here's what you need to understand. Jerusalem has been destroyed and rebuilt 25 times in history. And here's a portion of this wall. You can go and see it in Jerusalem today. There's this portion of this wall still standing. There's a man with priorities that decided to build something. This is not like put up a picket fence. This is move boulders that have rolled down a hill. This is move massive rocks and get them in place in 52 days, a job he should have never done that quickly. But even today, there is evidence of the building and the rebuilding of the wall that Nehemiah did. So let's talk about what tenacity demands. Tenacity demands a commitment to excellence. We talked about excellence before, but it demands a commitment to excellence. If you aim at nothing, you're going to hit it. And excellence is a word that is missing in our society. We get jobs half done, 75% done, 90% done. We don't complete the order. We don't complete the task. We stop and we don't finish and we don't put a bow on it. It has to be a commitment to excellence. It's interesting that in the parable of the talents, the good servant is commended. But the bad servant, the lazy servant, is not only denounced. In the parable of the talents, the lazy servant is called wicked. Not just lazy, but his laziness is called wickedness. We are a lazy culture. And if we're going to raise up leaders, we got to get people who want to do something besides just draw a paycheck. We are, by nature, in this culture, lazy. And we sit and we watch the news and go, all these nations are passing us in science and in math and everything else. And I wonder why that is. Because we're lazy. Because we're lazy. We're lazy in education. We're lazy in the home. We're lazy in business. We want to do the least that we can possibly do. I am so tired of going to fast food restaurants and listening to people having personal conversations about insane, dumb things when I want fast food. Emphasis on fast. It's called fast food. It's not called, well, did you know that she broke up with him? No, really? She broke up with him? Well, when that happened? Oh, about 2 weeks ago. Well, what's he doing about it? Well, he's dating somebody else. I'm going, customer, money, cash, job, unemployment. A commitment to excellence. You know, and fast food just always gets me, but it's that idea they hand you the bag and don't even look at you when they hand you the bag. Here, have a nice day. Thanks, won't be back. I've told you this story years ago when the Hardys was down here where Title Pawn or something is now. They had an 800 number that you could call when service was bad. And I had a car phone at the time, a mounted car phone at the time. I had that number programmed into my phone because I got such bad service. I don't know why I kept going back there. I got such bad service that I just had it programmed into my phone. And I can remember one Wednesday night after church, I drive through the drive-thru, I make my order, and I look over and watch the girl that's waiting on me, and I just hit the button on my phone, and they say, hello, how can I help you? I said, I just want you to know that the lady that is serving me at store number 829 is eating the French fries out of my French fry bag as she's preparing to put it on my tray. Sir? She's eating my French fries that I have paid for. I knew one thing. The manager of that store was not committed to excellence because a manager would never let that kind of stuff. He would be observant enough to say, do it right or you won't do it here. Or as Disney says, when they let somebody go, they tell people you have been recast in a non-Disney role. And you are free to audition in other places. There's a commitment to excellence. Secondly, it's being all in. It's being all in. If you've not read Mark Batterson's book, All In, you should read it. It's an outstanding book. Tenacious leaders have high expectations of themselves, and they have high expectations of others. Here's what non-tenacious leaders have. They have high expectations of others and low expectations on themselves. Not only do they have high expectations, if you're a tenacious leader, do you have high expectations for yourself and for others, but you clearly communicate so there's no confusion. When you read Nehemiah, you see what he does. He clearly communicates what he expects. He puts everybody to an assigned task. Now, I studied Civil War history in college, and I'm in no sense an authority, but I've been to Gettysburg 2 or 3 times to look over the battlefield. I remember when we were building this building, and I was going up to Chambersburg to speak, and Tom Yarborough, who was building the building, had a little twin-engine plane, so he said, I'll fly you up there. So Patrick Thompson and Alex Kendrick went with me, and we got permission to buzz the battlefield. So we went over the angle at Gettysburg. We came in from where the Confederate troops were and went along the wheat field and came in by the angle at 125 feet above the ground with all kind of people there. I just thought, boy, what war would have changed if they just had one plane. But one of the great heroes of the Battle of Gettysburg, and by the way, I believe I would be accurate in saying that if Joshua Chamberlain had not been the commander of the 20th Maine, the South would have done an end run on the North. They would have gotten between Meade's army and Washington, D.C., and they would have captured Washington, D.C., and we would be a divided nation today. In fact, most historians that study this say not only would we be a divided nation into the North and the South, but we would probably look more like Europe. There would be on this main continent some 10 to 12 small nations with no power. And if that had happened, there would have been no United States to win World War I and World War II. And I believe you can attribute it to that guy right there, Joshua Chamberlain, a theology student who rose to the rank of colonel in the 20th Maine simply because everybody ahead of him was getting killed. And at the Battle of Little Round Top, Chamberlain was positioned on July the 2nd with 300 soldiers as the 2nd Alabama was coming up the hill, and they made 2 regiment charges at 2:30 in the afternoon. They made a total of 5 charges. By the time of the last charge, Chamberlain's 287 to 300 men, depending on who you're reading, Chamberlain's 300 men were down to 80. And no soldier had more than 1 bullet left in his rifle. Many of them were empty. They were going to the bodies of the dead and wounded that could no longer fight and picking up bullets from them. And Sergeant Tozer came to Chamberlain and said there were no reinforcements coming, that they had to hold the flank at all cost, and it came down to 1 round of ammunition, and Joshua Chamberlain made a historically defining decision. He told his men to fix bayonets, and they did a right wheel maneuver. They came off the hill and they moved down the hill as one, and in less than 10 minutes, men with no ammunition on a full charge captured 4,000 Confederate soldiers because they shocked them so much by their actions. That's a man with tenacity. Listen to what Chamberlain said after the battle. He said, "I knew I may die, but I also knew I would not die with a bullet in my back." He wasn't going to die running from the battle. Number 3, not only is being all in, but a passion that can't be quenched. A passion that can't be quenched. I believe Nehemiah knew the best case scenarios, and I believe he knew the worst case scenarios. But he had a passion that couldn't be quenched. I mean, there was a fire in his bones about doing this. And if you and I are going to be tenacious leaders, there has to be some sense of fire in our bones that we won't let it go, that we won't give it up, that we won't quit, that it's too important. J.C. Ryle, a great theologian of another era, said this: "Zeal is a burning desire to please God, to do His will, and to advance His glory in the world in every possible way. A zealous man is preeminently a man of one thing. He is more than earnest, hearty, uncompromising, wholehearted, and fervent in spirit. He sees only one thing, lives for one thing, is swallowed up in one thing, and that one thing is to please God." Tenacity, passion. What are you passionate about? What are you passionate about? Are you passionate enough to give your life to it? to give yourself to it in the face of opposition, in the face of obstacles, in the face of people that move slower than you want to move and have less passion than you have? Are you willing to stay with it even when it looks like others aren't getting what you're passionate about? Passion is, first of all, the moral compass. It is the moral compass. It gives us direction in times of discouragement. When I'm discouraged, passion gives me a moral compass. What am I passionate about? I am passionate about revival. I am passionate about a move of God in this world. I am passionate about this church reaching this community in this region for Christ. I am passionate about us making a difference. I am passionate about us being a leader in racial reconciliation in this community. There are things that I'm passionate about. And really, when I look at it, I'm really passionate about one thing, and that is revival, because all those other things fall into place in a revival atmosphere. It's the glue that holds people together. It's the glue that holds people together. It's not only our compass, it's the glue. That it matters. We're going to do this. It's the magnet that attracts late adapters. It's the magnet that attracts late adapters. Now, in any movement, in any cause, in anything you're doing, there are people that are late to buy in. There are people that are quick to buy in. Oh, yeah, I'm with it. I'm on it. And then there are people that kind of stand back and say, well, let me think about it for a minute. And then there are people that wait until the last minute to come in. This is the magnet that attracts people. God is looking for people that are on fire for Him in such a way that they attract other people that are late adapters. Go, I don't know if I want to get that committed and that serious. It's the magnet, and it's the ruler. It's the ruler by which we measure our impact. I mean, you could be passionate about something, but if it's not making an impact, if it's not making a difference, you may be passionate about the wrong thing. Now, Nehemiah chapter 1, Nehemiah heard the report of the problem. Chapter 2, verses 1 through 10, he bathes everything in prayer. Chapter 2, verses 11 through 16, he surveys the situation. Look at chapter 2 and verse 12. And I arose in the night, I and a few men with me, and I did not tell anyone what my God was putting into my mind to do for Jerusalem. So Nehemiah gets up, and if you read chapter 2, he makes this complete circle around the city to evaluate for himself what's going on. In verse 16, the officials did not know where I had gone or what I had done, nor had I as yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or the rest who did the work. In other words, he's trying to make sure that he's got everything in a row, that he is passionate about doing it right and with the right people and letting people know at the right time about what he's going to do. John White, in his book Excellence in Leadership, says efficiency may begin with waiting on God, but it doesn't end there. Whatever the type of service we plan, it is important that we survey the field beforehand. So if you want to build a tower, Luke chapter 14, you count the cost. If you want to go to the war, Luke chapter 14, you count the cost. Chuck Swindoll said this, the most disillusioned people I know are those in the Lord's work who are paying the price of not thinking through their plans. Proverbs 14 and verse 8, the wisdom of the prudent is to understanding and to understand his way. So verses 17 and 18, he motivates the people before he starts delegating the work. Look at verse 17. Then I said to them, you see the bad situation where you're in, that Jerusalem is desolate, its gates burned by fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem so that we will no longer be a reproach. And I told them how the hand of my God had been favorable to me, and also about the king's words which he had spoken to me. Then they said, let us arise and build. So they put their hands to the good work. Now, just look at what Nehemiah did right here. First of all, he identified with the people. He identified with the people. He didn't call a press conference and say, I'm announcing this initiative and this is what we're going to do. Look, there's you and we and us. He identified with the people. He said, let us rebuild. Let's do this together. Secondly, he revealed his intentions. Come, let us rebuild. He revealed his intentions. He had the intention to rebuild. Now, there's a book that I don't think it's available, but it's got some great stories in it. Orville Butcher was the pastor of Skyline Wesleyan Church before John Maxwell went there. And he was the founder of the church. And Orville Butcher was this man of passion and vision. Derek Johnson was his college minister and his music minister for about 13 years while Orville Butcher was there. And Derek says, the first staff meeting I went to, Orville Butcher said, I'm going to win this community for Christ or die trying. If you feel any differently than that, you better pack your bags and leave in the morning. Now there's a man who made it clear what he was about. Butcher said, if you don't want to win this community to Christ, pack your bags and leave in the morning. So he revealed his intentions. This next Sunday, we're going to talk about Meet the Need. And one of the things that we're going to do in that is I'm going to talk about relaunch and some things that we're going to do between now and our 60th anniversary in October of 2016 to make sure we're ready for the next 60 years, that we're not coasting into our 60th anniversary, but we're ready to work and to do what God's called us to do. Number 3, he acknowledged the issues. He acknowledged the issues. You see the bad situation we are in. Now, this doesn't sound like a politician when all the charts are going down and the politicians say things are looking up. He saw a preferred future so that we will no longer be a reproach. He had a preferred future. He wanted things to be different when he was done than they were when he showed up. And then he gave them hope. I told them how the hand of God had been favorable to me and also about the king's word. So let us arise and build. So they put their hands to the good work. To take initiative simply means to have the necessary spirit to originate action and anticipate responses. Here's a man who originated action. Here's the preferred future. Do you want to live like this with rubble and defeat and discouragement? Or do you want to rebuild the wall and let's take some pride in who we are and what we're about? Number 4, a vision that cannot be deterred by lesser men. Nehemiah chapter 2 and verse 9. Then I came to the governors of the provinces beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent me officers of the army and horsemen. When Sanballat and Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard about it, it was very displeasing to them. Now that may be one of the great understatements in all the Bible. When you read what these guys do, actually they plot to kill Nehemiah. It was very displeasing to them that someone had come to seek the welfare of the sons of Israel. So these critics mocked him and they threatened him. Let me give you another Pastor Butcher story. The youth in the area around Skyline Wesleyan were so bad that the convenience store next door to the church put a restraining order where the youth could not hang out and come into the parking lot of a convenience store. That's bad. Even worse, drunk teenagers were showing up in the worship services, drunken and shouting in the worship services, trying to stop the worship. And so some of the men in the church came to Pastor Butcher and they said, either these kids go or we go. You choose. Well, listen to what they said. We don't want our children exposed to these kids or their lifestyle. And this is how Pastor Butcher replied. Men, I understand your concern. Here's mine. You and your families know the way to the cross. These young people don't have that knowledge. And God called me here to share the opportunity with them. And if you make me choose between you and them, I will choose them. You know who hates to deal with lost people? Religious people. Christian people love to deal with lost people because they know that there's hope for them. Religious people want them to clean up before they come to church. Listen, there's nowhere in the Bible where it says act better and then come to church. Clean up and then come to church. The Bible goes after lost sheep and sons in pig pens, and it gets them where they are. You didn't get better and then God accepted you. God loved you in spite of the way you were. And so these men come back at Pastor Butcher and says, well, if you're going to choose them, this church will never grow and never be famous. And Butcher replied, fame's not the issue. Ministry is. Now, just so you'll know, the church did grow and it did become famous. And 13 years later, that church averaged 1,000 teenagers every Sunday in church. What if Pastor Butcher had listened to a bunch of knuckleheads that said, we don't want our kids. Listen, let me tell you something. You can isolate your kids all you want to. The world's after them. You better learn how to get your kids to be soldiers in the army of God. If not, they're just going to get wounded in the battle because they don't know how to fight it. Either we're salt and light and we are aggressive, or the world takes us over by default. And so here's a pastor who said, if you're going to make me choose between guys like you that don't want to reach lost people and lost people, I'll choose the lost people. I'll choose them. 1,000 teenagers. I'd say that was worth it. I would say that was worth it. So there's a vision that cannot be deterred by lesser men. So now they begin making charges against him. Verse 19, when Sanballat and the Hornite and Tobiah the Ammonite official and Geshem the Arab heard it, they mocked us and despised us and said, what is this thing you are doing? Are you rebelling against the king? And so I answered them and said to them, the God of heaven will give us success. Therefore, we, his servants, will arise and build, but you have no portion, right, or memorial in Jerusalem. Now, the word mocked is an interesting word. It means to stammer or to stutter or to utter repeatedly a complaint. They were constantly mocking him. Some point you just want to give up. If you let your life be run by lesser men and by lesser people. Can I tell you something? The world is full of people that don't want to do anything. The world is full of people. Every job, every school, every home, every family, every business, every office, there are people that don't want to do anything. And when you start doing something, it makes it more obvious that they're not doing anything. And when it becomes more obvious that they're not doing anything, then the only way they can deal with you is to attack you and to undermine you and to mock you. Because they can't step up to their own plate, they try to knock you off of your plate. So there has to be this tenacity. And, you know, my old nature would just say, just quit, just give up. Don't fight it. But that's not how we win battles. And that's not how we fight spiritual warfare. And that's not how we deal with the things that are coming against our homes, our churches, our families, our schools, our nation. We must stand up. If you go to Europe today, you will find many of the great cathedrals in Europe today are now mosques and coffee shops and apartment complexes and flats and antique stores and businesses. Based on history and how things move across Europe in the West and move toward America, America has been typically about 50 years behind England and Europe in areas of decay. And so the missionary movement that began to decline in the 1950s in England now begins to decline in America. And the giving of the churches and the churches closing down and all these things that you see happening. Can I tell you something? Europe is just a shadow of America in the next 25 to 50 years unless we become tenacious leaders. It's not going to change by us shrugging our shoulders. It's not going to change with us praying at the same level that we're praying. It's not going to change by lessening the fervor of our hearts. I want to be like Caleb. At 85 years old, he said, God, give me a mountain. And by the way, in closing, the first principle of taking a mountain is you have to have been able to take a molehill before you can take a mountain. If you can't take a small hill, you can't take a big mountain. You got to have proven faithful in small things to get big things. Most of the people I started in ministry with didn't have tenacity. I've got guys my age that have been for the last 5 years, all they ever talk about when I talk to them is retirement, 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 retirement. I can't wait to retire. I can't wait to retire. I can't wait to retire. I'm looking forward to retirement. I just want to retire. And I am so tired of hearing that word from men that have 20 years of life left in them. Now, they may not do the same thing, but if you retire, you ought to go to work doing something else that makes a difference. You retire from the job, then work for Jesus for free and do it with tenacity. Do something with your life. Don't just coast. And just don't sit in a recliner and watch The Price is Right for the rest of your life. When there are young people that need father figures, that there are families that need encouragement, there are single moms that need a dad influence in the lives of their kids, that there are schools that need people to read books to their children, that there are teams that need people to come alongside and coach. There are young people that want to learn how to play instruments that need to be taught. There's so much for us to do. Retiring is the furthest thing from my mind, because as long as God gives me breath, I want to keep my hands to the plow. And when I fall, I want to fall forward. I don't want to fall backwards. I want to fall forward as a tenacious leader. Father, in this room are difference makers. There are men and women and young people in this room that can make a viable and vital impact on our culture. Lord, don't let us buy the lie that we can't make a difference. Don't let us make excuses when there are so many things that need to be done. Lord, give us mountains to climb. Give us fields to plow. Give us walls to build. Give us chores to do. And don't let us be content until we see you face to face. In Jesus' name, amen.